Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. Some moments in life split your world into before and after. What happened during what I thought would be our anniversary dinner became one of those moments for me. 3 years of dating, months of planning what I hoped would be a proposal. And it all came crashing down because of a phone conversation I was never supposed to hear. My name is Warren. Nancy and I had been together for 3 years when everything between us began getting muddled up. In those 3 years, I believed we were in a strong, committed relationship that was heading toward marriage. We had met through mutual friends at a house party, and from our first conversation, I knew there was something special about her. Our relationship had developed naturally over time. We both worked demanding jobs during the week. I was an account manager at a marketing firm, and she worked as a nurse at the city hospital. Because of our schedules and the fact that we lived in different parts of town, we had decided early on to maintain separate living arrangements while we figured out our long-term plans. She lived with her roommate Carol in a 2-bedroom apartment downtown, close to the hospital where she worked. I had my own place about 20 minutes away, a small house I had been renting for the past few years. This arrangement worked well for us initially because it gave us both independence during the busy work week while allowing us to spend quality time together on weekends. Our weekends had become sacred to our relationship. Friday evenings through Sunday nights were our time to connect, to be a couple, to build the foundation for what I hoped would eventually become a marriage. We would take turns staying at each other's places, go out for dinners and movies, take day trips to nearby attractions, or simply spend quiet evenings cooking together and talking about our dreams for the future. For the past year, I had been secretly planning to propose to Nancy. I had been arranging a special engagement ring, researching her preferences for styles and settings, and trying to figure out the perfect moment and location to ask her to marry me. I had even spoken to her parents during a family gathering, asking for their blessing traditionally. The ring I had chosen was a classic solitaire with a round diamond, exactly the style she had admired when we looked at wedding magazines together. I had worked with a jeweler for months to ensure every detail was perfect, from the setting to the engraving inside the band. But over the past few months, something had changed in Nancy's behavior toward me and our relationship. The changes were subtle at first, easy to dismiss as stress from work or temporary life complications. She seemed less enthusiastic about our weekend plans, often suggesting we stay in rather than go out together. Then she started bringing up excuses that would prevent us from seeing each other on weekends. A family obligation here, a work commitment there, a friend's crisis that required her immediate attention. Each excuse seemed reasonable on its own, but the pattern that emerged over time was troubling. What had once been automatic weekend plans that we both looked forward to became negotiations where I found myself having to convince her to spend time together. She would agree to see me, but with less enthusiasm than before, and she seemed distracted during our time together. The conversations that had once flowed naturally between us became stilted and forced. She was less interested in discussing our future together, changing the subject when I brought up topics like moving in together or taking a vacation we had been planning from the start of the year. Her phone, which had never been a barrier between us before, became a constant presence during our time together. She would check it frequently during dinner, respond to text messages while we were watching movies, and step out to take calls that she claimed were urgent, even during our most intimate moments. After about 2 months of this pattern, I realized that we had barely seen each other, and our conversations had become minimal and superficial. The woman I wanted to marry was slowly disappearing from my life, and I couldn't understand why. I tried talking to her about the changes I was noticing, but she dismissed my concerns as overthinking or being too needy. She claimed that work was particularly stressful, and that she was dealing with some personal issues that she preferred to handle on her own. But her explanations didn't match what I was observing. When I called her at times when she claimed to be working late, she often seemed to be in social settings rather than at the hospital. When she said she was too tired to see me because of her demanding schedule, she would post photos on social media showing her out with friends or attending events. The disconnect between what she was telling me and what I was seeing became impossible to ignore. I started to wonder if there was something she wasn't telling me, some issue in our relationship that she was avoiding rather than addressing directly. I decided to try something different to reignite our connection and get our relationship back on track. Instead of accepting her latest excuse for why we couldn't spend the weekend together, I made plans that would be harder for her to dismiss. I called her on a Thursday evening and told her that I wanted to take her out for a special dinner that weekend, which happened to be our anniversary. I suggested her favorite restaurant, an upscale Italian place downtown that we had been to several times for special occasions. I asked her to dress up and meet me there on Saturday evening. True to form, she immediately started offering reasons why the timing wasn't good. She mentioned a project at work that might require weekend hours and general fatigue from her busy week. She knew it was our anniversary, but suggested we meet up some other time. But this time, I wasn't going to accept her excuses. I told her that this dinner was important to me, and that I needed her to prioritize our relationship for one evening. I explained that we hadn't had quality time together in too long, and that I missed her. My persistence seemed to catch her off guard. After some back and forth, she finally agreed to meet me at the restaurant on Saturday evening. Her agreement came with less enthusiasm than I had hoped for, but I was relieved that she had committed to spending time together. I spent the rest of the week looking forward to our anniversary dinner and hoping that it would help us reconnect. I made a reservation at her favorite restaurant for 7 o'clock, requesting a quiet table where we could talk without distractions. Saturday evening, I arrived at the restaurant early to ensure everything was perfect. I wanted to make sure we had a good table, that the atmosphere was right, and that nothing would interfere with our time together. I was hoping that this dinner might even be the opportunity one had been waiting for to propose, if the moment felt right. The restaurant was busy, but not overcrowded, with soft lighting and the kind of intimate atmosphere that had made it one of our favorite places. The hostess seated me at a table near the window with a view of the city lights, exactly the kind of setting I had hoped for. Nancy arrived about 5 minutes after our reservation time, and despite everything that had been strained between us recently, she looked absolutely beautiful. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, had taken extra care with her hair and makeup, and carried herself with the confidence that had first attracted me to her. We greeted each other with a warmth that reminded me of better times in our relationship. I helped her into her seat, and for the first few minutes, it felt like we were back to being the couple we had been during our first year together. The dinner progressed better than I had dared to hope. We talked about everything that came to our minds. Nancy seemed more relaxed and engaged than she had been in months. She laughed at my jokes, asked follow-up questions about things I was telling her, and seemed genuinely present in our conversation. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was talking to the woman I had fallen in love with rather than a distant version of her who was going through the motions of being in a relationship. The connection that had been missing from our recent interactions seemed to be returning. We shared appetizers, enjoyed our main courses, and lingered over dessert in a way that felt natural and comfortable. The conversation flowed easily, covering topics both serious and lighthearted. I found myself thinking that maybe the rough patch we had been going through was behind us. As the evening wound down and we finished our coffee and dessert, I felt more optimistic about our relationship than I had in months. While I didn't feel that the moment was quite right for a proposal, I was encouraged by how well we had connected during the dinner. I excused myself to settle the bill and use the restroom, planning to return to the table to continue our conversation and perhaps suggest going somewhere else for a nightcap. The dinner had gone so well that I didn't want the evening to end yet. The restaurant was busy, so it took a few minutes longer than expected to get the server's attention and handle the payment. When I finished in the restroom and started making my way back to our table, I was already thinking about how to extend our time together. As I approached our table from across the restaurant, I could see Nancy sitting with her back to me, and I noticed that she was on her phone. This wasn't entirely surprising, as she had been checking her phone frequently during our recent time together. But I was disappointed that she couldn't wait until after our dinner to handle whatever message or call had come in. I decided to approach the table from the side where she wouldn't see me immediately, thinking it might be fun to surprise her or playfully comment on her phone usage during our romantic dinner. What started as a playful impulse turned into something much more serious when I got close enough to hear her conversation. It wasn't hard to notice that she was talking to her friend, presumably Carol or one of her other close friends. I could hear her side of the conversation clearly as I stood several steps away from the table, hidden from her view by other diners and the restaurant's layout. I heard her tell her friend that she had thought I was bringing her here to propose tonight. The casual way she mentioned this possibility caught me off guard, since she had never indicated to me that she was expecting or hoping for a proposal. I stood there, listening to a conversation that I wasn't supposed to hear, but couldn't bring myself to interrupt or walk away from. I couldn't hear her friend's response from the other side of the phone, but I waited to hear what Nancy would say next. Her next words changed everything between us forever. She said that if I had proposed that evening, she would have stood up and left me right there in the restaurant. She said she didn't want anything to mess with her relationship with Michael. The name hit me like a physical blow. Michael. She was talking about another man, someone who was apparently important enough to her that the possibility of my proposal was something she wanted to avoid rather than celebrate. I was speechless as I stood there, steps away from her back, processing what I had just heard. The woman I had been planning to propose to, the woman I thought I was going to marry, was telling her friend that she would reject me publicly and humiliatingly if I asked her to be my wife. More than that, she was telling her friend that there was another man in her life, someone named Michael, who was apparently more important to her than our 3-year relationship. The pieces of her recent behavior suddenly started making sense in the most painful way possible. The excuses for not spending weekends together, the distraction during our time together, the constant phone checking, the general withdrawal from our relationship. It all made sense now. She wasn't going through a rough patch or dealing with work stress. She was seeing someone else. I felt like a fool for not catching on earlier. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about her feelings for me, about our future together, was suddenly revealed to be false. The dinner that I had hoped would reconnect us had instead shown me that there was nothing left to reconnect. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. The engagement ring that I had been carrying in my pocket for weeks, waiting for the right moment, suddenly felt like a weight that I needed to get rid of. Rather than confronting her at the table or making a scene in the restaurant, I decided to simply leave. I took several steps backward away from the table and looked for another exit that would allow me to leave without her seeing me. The restaurant had a side entrance that led to the parking area, and I was able to make my way out without passing by our table again. I left Nancy sitting there, still on her phone, probably still talking about how relieved she was that I hadn't proposed to her that evening. The walk to my car felt surreal. I had entered the restaurant a few hours earlier as a man in love, planning a future with someone I thought loved me back. I was leaving as someone who had discovered that the relationship he had invested 3 years of his life in was essentially over. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to go back into the restaurant and confront her about what I had heard. Another part of me wanted to pretend I hadn't heard anything and try to salvage what was left of our relationship. But I knew that neither of those options would change the fundamental reality of what I had discovered. Nancy was involved with someone else, and she had no interest in the future I had been planning for us. There was no point in pretending otherwise. I started driving home, my mind racing with questions and emotions. How long had she been seeing this new guy? Was he the reason for all the changes in her behavior over the past few months? Had our entire relationship been a lie, or had she started seeing him recently? About 10 minutes into my drive home, my phone started ringing. Nancy's name appeared on the screen, and I realized she had probably finished her phone call and noticed that I was no longer at the table. I answered the call, not sure what I was going to say, but knowing that I couldn't pretend nothing had happened. Before I could say anything, she started talking, asking where I had gone and why I had left the restaurant without telling her. Her tone was confused and slightly annoyed, as if I had been rude to leave without explanation. I told her to go home to her new guy, Michael, because I had heard everything she said on the phone. The words came out more calmly than I felt, but I wanted her to know immediately that I was aware of what was really going on. There was silence on the other end of the phone for several seconds. Then she started trying to act confused, claiming she didn't know what I was talking about and asking me to explain what I thought I had heard. But I was too angry and hurt to play her mind games or give her an opportunity to lie her way out of what I had clearly heard. I told her that I knew exactly what I had heard and that there was no point in pretending otherwise. I ended the call and immediately put my phone on silent mode. Over the next several hours, she called repeatedly, but I refused to answer any of her calls. I also ignored the text messages that started coming in, first asking me to call her back, then trying to explain or justify what had happened. I spent the rest of the evening and most of Sunday processing what had occurred and what it meant for my future. The relationship that I had thought was heading toward marriage was clearly over, and there was no point in prolonging the inevitable. I avoided any contact with Nancy for the rest of the week. I didn't call her, didn't respond to her messages, and didn't make any attempt to see her. I needed time to process what had happened and to figure out how to move forward with my life. I knew what I had heard, and I wasn't going to act like I didn't know the truth about her feelings and her involvement with someone else. It was clear why she was no longer invested in our relationship. She had found someone else who was more important to her than the 3 years we had spent together. The hardest part was accepting that the woman I had been planning to propose to had never been as committed to our relationship as I had believed. While I had been saving for an engagement ring and planning our future together, she had been pulling away and investing her emotions in someone else. Looking back now, I can see that there were signs I chose to ignore or rationalize away. The changes in her behavior, the excuses for not spending time together, the distraction during our conversations. These were all indicators that her heart was no longer in our relationship. But at the time, I had been so focused on my own plans and hopes for our future that I hadn't wanted to see the evidence that she didn't share those hopes. I had been planning a proposal while she was planning her exit from our relationship. The dinner that was supposed to reconnect us instead became the moment when I finally understood the truth about where we stood. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones you're not supposed to hear, and sometimes the most valuable information comes from moments when people think they're speaking privately. That Saturday evening taught me that it's possible to be completely wrong about someone you think you know well. It taught me that love and commitment aren't always mutual, even in relationships that seem solid and stable. Most importantly, it taught me that sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is show you who they really are, even when that revelation is painful. I never spoke to Nancy again after that week. There didn't seem to be any point in having a conversation about what I had heard or trying to work through the deception and betrayal. The relationship was over the moment she told her friend that she would reject my proposal and mentioned another man's name. The engagement ring that I had been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment, went back to the jeweler the following Monday. The future I had been planning disappeared as quickly as it takes to overhear a phone conversation. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had returned to the table before she made that phone call, if I had never heard her conversation with her friend. Would she have continued pretending to be committed to our relationship while seeing Michael on the side? Would she have eventually broken up with me in a different way? But ultimately, I'm grateful that I heard what I heard that evening. It saved me from proposing to someone who would have rejected me publicly and humiliatingly. It saved me from continuing to invest in a relationship that had already ended in her mind, even if she hadn't told me yet. The truth is painful, but it's always better than living a lie. That anniversary dinner that never was became the moment when I learned who Nancy really was and what our relationship actually meant to her. It wasn't the ending I had planned, but it was the ending I needed.